Well, thank you so much, Dale. It's good to see all of you here. Really do appreciate your singing. You sing out, and that's so important. You know, many years ago, this has probably got to be 25 or 30 years ago. I think Drew is still pretty young. We were on our way on vacation and probably either to or from a Dent family reunion. And we would typically caravan. Those days we'd all have a big caravan of cars going down the road. And so very often on Sunday, we'd end up at the same congregation. We'd attend services. And so, 30 or 40 of us had come trooping in and kind of take up one section. And I remember one place, I think this was in Utah. Yeah, we went in there and the song leader hit the first note. And I can remember, and that's one of the things I love. I love hitting that first note. Mindy's dad taught me how important it is to go with that song when you hit that first note. So, man, I hit that bass note, and there's a little kid sitting in front of me, and his shoulders kind of went like this. And then he turned around and looked at me, And if I'd have known then what I know now, I could have said to him, "You just wait till my boy grows up and you'll see somebody who can sing." But that's what you all do. You sing with that heart that Don talked about. That is beautiful. And just want to let you know how much I appreciate being a part of that worship, that praise to God Almighty. Go ahead and open your Bibles to John, the 10th chapter. Coming up here on the screen here. Just a second, the folks online can already see this. We're going to be talking about the abundant life. And let's see if I can get that. There we go. Get that hidden there so you can see that, the whole thing. In John 10:10, this is a beautiful passage of scripture, and one that I refer to with frequency because it really is, I think, talking about one of the things that we can use to help share the good news of the gospel. Jesus points out in John 10 and at verse number 10, he says, "The thief does not come except to steal and to kill and to destroy. I have come that they may have life and that they may have it more abundantly." And so if everything goes according to plan, I'm going to be kind of presenting each month maybe a lesson that's going to be talking about sharing the good news. And this first one is understanding the goodness of the good news through the abundant life that we gain through the gospel. Talking to other people about the gospel, about the good news. We can really take our cue from Jesus. Jesus used lots of illustrations. He used lots of metaphors to explain the goodness of the good news. And I think that's very important for us as Christians. We, as Christians, have to be able to talk to other people about what's so good about the good news. And if we are unaware of that, how can we do it? How can we share the goodness of the good news if we ourselves don't really understand it? And so Jesus uses lots of different ways of illustrating the goodness of the good news. This is just one of them. And as I say, if everything goes according to plan, we'll look at lots more. But I think this idea of life, I mean, just think of it just as life, that's something that I think resonates with everyone. This idea of life. We desire life. And what we'll see in this lesson is that Jesus will talk quite a bit about how his message, his gospel, his good news is designed to do that, is designed to bring us life. And so by following Jesus' example, ourselves understanding this abundance of life that we gain through following Jesus and listening to his word and applying his principles to our daily walk of life will help us then, I think, share the good news about Jesus, about the gospel, just following the example of Jesus. And so, when we talk about that, that's really one of the basic ideas. The good news is this abundance that we have. This passage, I think, here in John 10:10 is a great way for us to start, a great way for us to think about it, that we can share this with other people. This is one of the reasons why we're Christians, is because we've come to recognize that Jesus has promised and can deliver on that promise of bringing us a life of abundance. And you can share that with non-Christians, with your friends who maybe are interested, or maybe they're not really interested. There's really, I think, two ways that you can, see how people are going to respond. You can share John 10:10 with them, and there's really kind of a couple of ways that they can respond to that. They can respond negatively to it. Maybe they'll say something like, "Oh, that's great for you, but I don't need that. I've already got an abundant life. I've already got it. I don't need that." And what I think might be a way that you could then respond to that kind of negative rejection, that thanks but no thanks, you can respond by saying, "Well, that's great. I'm glad that you have that sense of abundance, because I know that it doesn't work that way for me. I know my experience of life has been that I've had to deal with a lot of disappointments. I don't know about you, but I know that there's situations in the work environment where I've experienced, unfair treatment. Have you ever worked for a bad boss? And how fun was that? Okay. There are lots of things going on in the government that really bother me, makes me feel kind of apprehensive about the future of this nation. I think that is a real problematic. And so that's what I think, that approaching it from the standpoint that it's Satan who's kind of robbing us of this abundance, is really taking this away from us, is that an appropriate way to think about it. Henry mentioned one that gets me too: the way people drive. I can let that get under my skin really fast. So the point is, there's lots of things that you could say. You can personalize that to your own life experience. But I bet you that you can talk personally about things that take away, that steal, that rob us of this sense of abundance, that in its place creates fear, apprehension, anxiety, worry, a sense of discomfort. And what we are saying is that it's Jesus who has given me the tools that I need to overcome those fears, to overcome that unfairness, to overcome the crazy way people drive their cars. Now, again, the whole idea is to just try to get them to think a little more realistically about that, because really, a lot of times when you're talking to people about the gospel, they're just thinking of the easiest ways to shut you up. They just don't want to talk about it. And so by just saying, "No, I've already got it. No, thanks. I don't need the soap you're selling." That's basically the response. So you're trying to get them to think, "Well, wait a second, maybe I do. Maybe like you, I also have had to deal with an unfair boss. Maybe like you, I've also gotten scared about the way our nation is going." And again, that's across the political spectrum. I don't care what you are politically. I can pretty much guarantee you there's a politician somewhere that rubs you the wrong way, right? And that is very upsetting to you. And so that's the point. Now, again, you're just trying to present Jesus as the key to giving you relief from that, to giving you this abundance. How can I have an abundant life when I work for such a jerky boss? How can I have an abundant life when this drunk ran through the red light and just demolished my car? right? How can I do that? And that's what we're trying to say. Jesus is the key. He's the one that can show us how we can do that. Now, of course, the other response that they may have is they may agree with you from the get-go. They may totally understand that that's right. There's a lot of things going on in life that are stripping us away. They can see this idea that Satan is robbing us of this abundance. And so, again, you can initiate the conversation and talk to them about how Jesus can supply what is lacking in their lives to get them on this road to abundance, to the abundant life, the life that they really want to live, a life worth living in the here and the now. And that, of course, there's lots of ways to do that, one of which we've already talked about is to talk to them about the fact that this is kind of Satan's stock and trade. This is what he's really good at. Satan is really good. And what we're really saying, we don't have to put it this way, but what we're really saying is the problem is sin. And when you talk to people, I've not found it beneficial to just from the get-go accuse them of being sinners. I'm just saying that they don't like that. Okay. So to be able to task Satan, and this is totally legitimate. I mean, go back to the Garden of Eden. And what did Satan do to Eve? He lied to her and she believed it. He tricked her. He's a deceiver. And so for most people, this is the problem, that it's not that they get up in the morning and say, I love to sin. Most people don't operate that way. What's going on is that Satan is robbing them. Satan is deceiving them. So you really are getting them to think without actually accusing them, you are a sinner and you're going to hell. Now, again, I've not had much success with that method. You may try that. I can tell you the story about the first time I went door knocking with one of the ladies at church where, the place where I met Mindy down in the Bay Area. And that's how she'd start the conversation. She told me, Gary, you're pretty young, so I've done this before, so you let me handle these first ones. And once you get the hang of it, I'll let you. Okay. And so she knocked on the door, and she said, the person opens the door, and she says, do you go to church? And the person says, no. She said, well, you're going to hell. And slam, the door gets slammed in our face. So, okay, well, let's go to the next one. So we go to the next house. Bap, bap, bap. She knocks on the door. Guy opens the door. You go to church? Yes, I do. Where do you go? Oh, I go down to the Church of God. Well, the Church of God's going to hell. Bam! The door gets slammed there. We did that probably 10 or 12 doors in a row. Every door, there was a lot of doors that weren't answered, but every door that was answered, that's how she'd start, and every door got slammed in our face. Finally, she said, well, I guess people are not interested in hearing the gospel. And here's the ironic thing. Her name was Joy. And I said to her, I guess not, Joy. We might as well quit. And we did. And I learned something as a young man that there's ways to approach people. And this is what I think is going to be a lot more conducive, to just talk to them about how Satan operates to trick them, to deceive them. You don't have to use that Satan's tricking them or deceiving them. You just say Satan robs us of abundance. That's his stock and trade. That's what he loves doing. And you're then getting in a position ready to present Jesus as the opposite of that, as the one who brings back the abundance of life that Satan has taken away from it. And there's lots of ways that you can illustrate that. We've already talked about some of them. There's a lot of political turmoil. Again, it doesn't matter. They don't have to agree with you politically. I tend to be pretty conservative politically, but you can do this with people who have they're at the opposite end of the political spectrum, because they're going to feel the same way about some politicians somewhere that I feel about the politicians that upset me. So the point is, there's a lot of political turmoil. There's a lot of crazy stuff going on in the world politically. And very often that's attached, there's a sense of urgency in the nation that if we don't get the right politician elected, the future of America is toast. And again, it's across the political spectrum. It doesn't matter if you're conservative. It doesn't matter if you're liberal. It doesn't matter if you're an independent. We all think that there's an attachment to politics, to the sense of well-being and welfare. And this is one of the things that we can share. Well, Jesus will show you how to overcome that, how you can still live a maximal life in spite of the guy in office not being the guy that you think should be in office. And that's one of the great things about the kingdom of heaven. The kingdom of heaven supplants all the other kingdoms. That's what we're studying, by the way, in Daniel. Jeff mentioned that we're studying Daniel. We're in Daniel 2. Henry mentioned Daniel 2 in the image that he saw there. And if you're familiar with that image, there's this rock that comes hurtling out of nowhere, smashes into that statue that's representing all the kingdoms of men. And what is this rock that comes out of nowhere that smashes in? What does it do to all the kingdoms of men? It obliterates them. It transplants them. And it becomes the eternal kingdom that shall. Now, there's going to be people who might be interested. And you can say, are you interested? I can explain how that works. How you can live in a place like the Roman Empire and still belong to a kingdom in which your king is marvelous. Your king really cares about you. And he will teach you how to live in the midst of this political dysfunction that you see going on around about you. Health issues. Does anybody have health issues? You have any health concerns? Okay. And this is what Jesus can teach you. He will teach you how you can deal with that. How about this one? Finances. Nobody has any financial problems, right? Nobody has any financial worries. See what we're talking about? You can go, and what I would suggest is you look at things that you yourself have experienced so that you can tell them, I've experienced it. I know what it feels like. I know what it feels like to be worried about money, to not have more month than money. I know what that's like, you see. And here's the point. So does Jesus. How about this one? Death. Okay. Let's look at that one. Hebrews, the 2nd chapter. And this is one where I think in particular, oftentimes Christians are still enslaved to this bondage that's spoken of here. So again, it's often Christians who aren't really understanding this abundant life that Jesus has promised to them, because they're still held in bondage by this fear of death that the Hebrew writer talks about here. So let's look at that. Hebrews 2, beginning at verse number 14. Inasmuch as the children have partaken of flesh and blood, he himself, like talking about Jesus, he himself likewise shared in the same, that through death he might destroy him who has the power of death, that is the devil. Satan is robbing us of the abundant life because he's got most of us scared to death of death. What's the next verse go on to say? And release those who through fear of death were all their lifetime subject to bondage. That's what Jesus can do. And maybe you've experienced that fear. Can you imagine how you can impact a fellow human being's life if you yourself, as a Christian, understand what the Hebrew writer is talking about here? And you finally, through the marvelous good news of the gospel, begin to overcome your fear of death. Could you explain that to another human being, how that works? And do you think it might be something they would honestly want to listen to? I think so too. This is what Jesus is saying. This is the good news. This is what we as Christians have to understand. We as Christians ourselves need to understand what's so good about the good news. One of the things, as we'll follow this up with many others, there's lots of other elements to the good news, but one of them is to understand and exemplify the abundance of life that Jesus Christ offers us. And I am convinced that that is a message that the world would like to hear. The world would like to know, but how can we tell it to them if we ourselves don't know it? If we ourselves have not experienced the very abundance that Jesus has promised to give us. So let's talk about this. And really, it's the idea of biology. Like I said at the outset, Jesus uses lots of metaphors, he uses lots of examples. His teaching was, the hallmark of his teaching was the parable, right? And that's an example of using metaphors. That's an example of using illustrations to teach a deeper lesson. And he talks a lot about biology. Bio is the Greek word life, and ology is Greek for the study of. Jesus understood that he was talking to people who were interested in life. They were interested. They had the same fears that you and I have. They have the same desires that you and I have. They just want to live a good life. They don't necessarily want to be a billionaire like Warren Buffett or Bill Gates, but how about just getting a little slice of the pie? Would that be okay? Do you relate to that? I just want my little slice of the pie. Well, guess what those people back in Jesus' day wanted? They wanted that same exact thing. They wanted that little slice of the pie. They wanted that life. And Jesus says, well, let me tell you about biology, because that's what I'm all about. I am all about life. Let's take a look at some of the examples here of how he gives them lessons. He uses biology to illustrate what's so good about the good news. And if we understand this, then we begin to appreciate the power of Jesus and his principles, his teachings to give us this abundance of life. John 5, beginning at verse 24, he says, most assuredly I say to you, he who hears my word and believes in him who has sent me has everlasting life. Now, that's something that those people, that's something that we don't observe everlasting life. Everything that lives eventually what? Dies. Would you be interested in learning how you can overcome that problem? This is what he's talking about. This is what he's saying. Most assuredly, I say to you, he who hears my word and believes in him who sent me, that's God the Father, has everlasting life and shall not come into judgment, but has passed from death into life. Most assuredly, I say to you, the hour is coming, and now is, when the dead will hear the voice of the Son of God, and those who hear will live. Whereas the Father has life in himself, that's the key. The key to life is God. Who is the generator of all life? Well, if you've read Genesis, the first chapter, you know who did that. That's God. And as he will go on and point out, just as you all know, I know, Jesus is saying, I know that as a Jew, you guys have read Genesis 1. I know you've read that. So you already know that my Father is the generator of all life. Well, look at what he goes on to say. Just as the Father has life in himself, so he has granted the Son to have life in himself. He possesses the same power of what that God the Father possesses. Life, to give you life. And that's what he's saying to these people. Do not marvel at this, for the hour is coming in which all who are in the grave will hear his voice and come forth, those who have done good to the resurrection of life, and those who have done evil to the resurrection of condemnation. Now, don't have time to delineate this. He equivocates on the word hear, because notice up in the initial verses, he talks about all who hear will be granted life. Those who hear, see that in verse 25, those who hear will live, but then he equivocates on that meaning, and down in verse 28, do not marvel at this, for the hour comes which are who are all in the grave will hear his voice and come forth. Those who have done good to the resurrection of life, and those who have done evil to the resurrection of condemnation. That's an interesting study of how he equivocates on the word hearing. In one instance, it simply means the physical act of hearing. In the other instance, it means those who hear and what? And obey. Okay. And so that's the point. But that, don't get up on that. What is the key is that Jesus is talking about biology. I have the power to grant life for eternity, just like God the Father has that power. He's the one that created all of this. And so what he's talking about here is biology, how to stay alive. Okay. What's really interesting in all of this is that Jesus goes into this discourse after he has healed a lame man. The story of this poor guy, he desperately wants to be cured of his terrible handicap. He was sure that if he could just get in the pool of water while it was being stirred up, that he could be healed. But being crippled, what could he never do? He never could get into the pool, right? He never could get into the healing waters. Yeah, I want life. I want to be able to walk around just like everybody else can walk around. But I can't do it because it's just out of it's right there. The life-giving pool. Now, again, we're not going to get sidetracked into his belief that an angel was doing all of this and that was going to get. That's not the point. The point is that Jesus uses that occasion and he asks the guy up there, you can read 19 through 21, he asks the guy, well, do you want to be healed? Because Jesus is saying, I'm the guy that can do it. I'm the guy that can give life back to you. And so what goes on then down here, the operative verses in John 5, 24 through 26 is really in response to the crazy accusation then that the enemies of Christ make. Well, you healed on the Sabbath and that's sinful. And Jesus says, that's nuts. To grant life? To do what my Father does? My Father's all about life and I'm all about life. You're nuts if you think that this is wrong for me to do that. Ask the lame man that was just healed. What do you think he thinks about it? You see. And so that's the point. What Jesus is saying, anybody who can answer the question, is life a task which, you just get to that point where I finally got enough money. And what happens? Bam, something happens. Your car breaks down and there it goes. It's just right there, isn't it? It's just right there. And it's you're the lame man. You're seeing the pool, and Jesus comes like, you want to get rid of that? You tired of that? Listen to me, because I'm all about life. I'm all about granting you life. And I'm convinced that there are people who are interested to know that Jesus makes healing and abundance easily accessible. Something that our life experience tells us is just right there. If I could just crawl fast enough, but I can't. I can't. Jesus says, I can. I can. You want to be healed? Then listen to me, because I am all about life. There's another example that we can look at in the very next chapter. Let's move on into John 6. In John 6 at verse 35, this just makes sense. This is biology. This is basic biology. What we have to eat to live, right? If we quit eating, we'll starve to death. John 6, verse 35, he said, I am the bread of life. He who comes to me shall never hunger, and he who believes in me shall never thirst. Of course, as I say, we all know that we need to eat to live. Once again, Jesus is using a metaphor. He's using an illustration. He's using a physical thing to talk about a more important spiritual principle, to talk to them about spiritual life, that's the key. the key to abundance in this life is to not put so much emphasis on this life. Okay, and that's what he's saying here. So clearly, the essential factor here in this metaphor is food. It's the bread that he speaks about. And equally obvious is that he's really talking about spiritual food, isn't he? Think he's talking about physical bread when he says, I am the bread of life? Obviously not. So Jesus is saying, I'm the source, not just of abundance in the life to come, but I am the source of abundance in this present material world. And so he's really hooking that up. And it's that lack of understanding of the superiority of the spiritual food that we need, which is the crucial ingredient to really bringing about abundance in this life. Dropping on down to verse number 47, picking up now his lesson on this metaphor of food and life, and that he's the bread of life. Most assuredly, I say to you, he who believes in me has everlasting life. I am the bread of life. Your fathers ate manna in the wilderness and are dead. You see what he's saying? He's drawing a comparison between the physical food that they ate. It kept them physically alive, but they were kind of like dead men walking. And all you have to do is read about the story when they got up to the promised land, the Jordan River, the first time, and they backed away. You had all those dead men walking. They walked around for 40 years in the wilderness. They were already dead. As good as dead. A whole new generation was raised up and brought into the promised land. And that's the way most people live their life. They live their life in this present physical world just like dead men walking. That's all they are. Dead men walking. And that's no way to live life. And that's what Jesus said. You need food, but it's not a physical thing. It's a spiritual thing, as he very clearly points out. I am the living bread. Verse where we left off in verse 49, your fathers ate the manna, that physical food. Yeah, it kept them alive, but it was a worthless life, dead men walking life. So he contrasts that. This bread, the bread I offer you, this bread comes down from heaven, that one may eat of it and not die. I am the living bread which came down from heaven. If anyone eats of this bread, he will live forever. Now, he's not talking about the Lord's Supper. He's talking about his teaching, his principles. His teaching and his principles are the bread of life. And you eat that, you take it in, you digest it, you ingest it, you digest it, you understand it. It brings abundance. This is what it's designed to do. It's designed just like this little sprout here. You plant that seed, you water it, you take care of it. What is that little seed going to do? It's going to come to life. Because that's the way God designed it. Well, he designed the same thing to spiritually happen to you when you plant the seed of the Word of God, the Word of Jesus, the gospel, the good news in your heart. It will do that. And that's the point, is that ironically, Jesus is famous for these paradoxical kind of statements. He that seeketh to find his life will what? What did Jesus say? He that seeketh to find his life will what? Lose it. What? Well, that's what he's talking about. If you want the abundant life in this life, here's what you must understand. It's the spiritual food of Jesus. It's de-emphasizing the material things. It's not saying that they have no value, no importance whatsoever. It's just saying they're not as important as spiritual things. As important as physical food is for life, there's something more important for life. And guess what that is? Spiritual food. You all know in the first temptation that Jesus faced, this is what he said to Satan. This is what he said to the guy that robs you of life, that deceives you. This is what he said. It is written, man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that proceeds from the mouth of God. And that's what we can talk to people about. That's what we can say. That's what I've learned. I have learned, as counterintuitive as it may first seem, I've learned the absolute truth of the reality by de-emphasizing, not saying it has no consequence, not saying it has no importance whatsoever. I just move it down my priority list a notch or two. Yeah, it's important. Physical things are important. Physical food is important. But what's more important? What gives me the abundant life is my own prioritizing spiritual food at the top of the list. I understand like never before what Jesus meant when he said this to Satan. It's not bread alone that's life. It's every word that proceeds out of the mouth of God. And I've experienced that, and I see it. And let me tell you the difference it's made in my life. The difference, the abundance that the Lord has given me. And all I do is just listen to him. I'm not perfect. I make mistakes. I mess up. He even has provision for that. So as we draw the lesson to a conclusion, everybody, I think, is interested in life, biology. And as we'll go through this series, we'll understand that there's a lot more metaphors. There's a lot more ways of illustrating the goodness of the good news than just talking about life. But this is one of them. The gospel is about life. And we who are Christians need to understand that. We need to exemplify it. There are many things that make this life hard, make it difficult, whether it's politicians or bad health or finances or fear of anxieties about dying, whatever. Jesus is the one who will teach you, who will teach me everything I need to have a life of abundance in a clearly messed up world. And you can begin to experience that this morning if you've not already followed the pathway that leads to that abundance. You can come forward, hear, believe, repent, confess, and be baptized. You can begin to personally experience the wonders of this abundant life by placing the emphasis where it needs to be, on the spiritual food that you get from Jesus. Come forward, make those wishes known. All together, we stand and sing.